Hello and welcome back to the Matrix Green Pill podcast. I'm your host, Hilmarie Hutchison. On this show, we explore the minds and journeys of leaders, founders, and visionaries shaping our world. Today, we are tackling the invisible forces that drive and sometimes derail high performers: anxiety, burnout, and the modern fear of speaking our minds. For many, anxiety and burnout are seen as glitches in the matrix, things to be suppressed or deleted. But what if that energy isn't a bug? What if it's actually a piece of meaningful data that, if decoded correctly, could become your greatest competitive advantage? My guest today is a master at decoding that internal source code. Dr. Chloe Carmichael is a clinical psychologist, speaker, and USA Today best-selling author. Dr. Chloe serves on the advisory board of Women's Health magazine and is renowned for her warmth and direct approach to high-stakes conversations. She's the author of Nervous Energy, Harness the Power of Your Anxiety, and her latest book, Can I Say That? Why Free Speech Matters and How to Use It Fearlessly. Today, we're unpacking the psychological toll of self-censorship and how to channel our natural anxiety into sustainable, grounded leadership. Dr. Chloe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Hilmarie. It's great to be with you.
Dr. Chloe, you spend your life helping others navigate their turning points or their green pill moments. But I'd like to start with yours. What was your green pill moment, the action or event that was the turning point for you or your career?
Sure. I guess I feel like I've had a few growth spots in my career. I was actually a yoga teacher before I was a clinical psychologist. And it was through that work helping stressed out New Yorkers with customized yoga routines that wanted to know more about how their mind was really working with these meditations. That's what inspired me to become a clinical psychologist and, was doing a lot in clinical psychology, as you mentioned, about the healthy function of anxiety, which is to stimulate preparation behaviors. And that was great work. And I was really enjoying that. But then actually during COVID, I started to get really concerned as a mother. I had a 3-year-old son at the time who's now 9, but I was really concerned because he was going to be going out of the house for the first time and would have to be wearing a mask the whole time. And everybody around him was going to be in masks. And I was just really concerned about what that could do for his development to just be constantly unable to see the faces of the people around him and vice versa. So I started to speak out about that, even though it was a very controversial issue at the time. But as a clinical psychologist, I felt like it was important to discuss the developmental issues that we could be putting on children by having them in masks all the time. I noticed it felt really good to speak out. It was scary, but yet it was relieving. And I found it was sharpening my cognitive processes, even just as I started to formulate my reasoning and my scientific concerns about this. And I noticed it was also emotionally regulating because I'd been holding my feelings back because I knew it was controversial. So when I made the decision, I started speaking in the media and things like that. And I just noticed I felt like I was a lot more authentic. That was actually what prompted me to write my new book about the mental health benefits of freedom of expression, of freedom of speech, which again was kind of another controversial topic, but I felt like it was important. So I went out on a limb to do that. I would call that the kind of most controversial green pill moment, but also one of the most fulfilling.
Wow, certainly a powerful shift in perspective, realizing that first of all, noticing that there was a need to protect your 3-year-old son. And then once you started speaking out, feeling the benefits to yourself, the mental health benefits, and feeling more authentic for being able to speak out. So just to step back a little bit, many founders rely on anxiety as fuel, but there is a razor-thin line between high-functioning drive and a complete psychological crash. In your experience, what are the subtle warning signs that productive nervous energy is metastasizing into destructive burnout, and why do high performers consistently ignore them?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So, in psychology, there's something called the general adaptation to stress. And what that is when we go under high stress moments and phases, our body actually starts to give us extra adrenaline and we have an extra high sense of alert. That can be really helpful to help us rise to the occasion to grapple with stress. However, if we remain in that high alert state for too long, of course, all that happens is we become depleted. There's only so much extra reserves of energy and adrenaline that we have. The important thing is that we have to rest and replenish. So I think when people start feeling like they're jittery and they're on edge, but they don't even exactly know why, or they're starting to pride themselves on just not getting a lot of sleep or not getting a lot of rest, rather than just in this particular moment, like, oh, I'm working really hard on this project and I just haven't slept a lot this week because I'm wrapped up in this project. Okay, that's fine. It's more of your lifestyle where you're like, yeah, my whole lifestyle, my whole job is always stressful. I can't remember the last time I had a good night's sleep. Then you're probably more in the burnout risk zone.
Excellent. So when it's for shorter periods of time, there are going to be times or projects when maybe we are not sleeping enough. But as you say, some people pride themselves on never, ever getting enough sleep. But then you're depleting yourself. And that is a warning sign when it goes for a long time, when you can't even get proper night's sleep.
Exactly. And I would say the same thing too, for example, for social nourishment. A lot of times really high achieving driven people, they're willing to put their own needs aside to get things done, which again, whether it be for, sleep, as we just discussed, or sometimes as well with social time, that people can think of that as something that's just a frivolous extra. But in fact, social support is actually really crucial to mental health. So again, for somebody that says, oh yeah, I don't have time, for a bunch of chit chat and small talk and all that stuff in my life because I'm so busy doing big, important things. Again, to a certain degree, I think it's good to be able to prioritize what needs to get done over going to a party. But then on the other hand, if you're neglecting your social life and your family life habitually to the point where you don't feel like any of them really know you and feel close to you and you can rely on them for support, then again, you're getting more into that burnout zone.
Really interesting. So social time is not a frivolous waste of time. We actually do need those social connections and those social interactions for our mental well-being.
Right, which actually also connects into the premise of my new book about the importance of freedom of expression to mental health. Again, for example, there's a section in the book about the difference between self-censorship and healthy self-restraint. So again, certainly we don't need to share everything with everyone all the time. We need to have a filter and be considerate of others. But if we're censoring ourselves so much because we're afraid if I, share the wrong opinion about immigration or welfare or crime or, abortion or anything, it feels like everything is such a hot topic issue these days that people are walking on eggshells and they're afraid to be authentic with people. And again, healthy self-restraint, there's a time and a place for that. But if the people who are close to you that you see frequently, etc., if they not only don't know what you think about values-based topics, but maybe they even think you believe something other than what you believe because you're pretending to believe what is politically correct in order to get by. That's when, again, you're getting into the real self-censorship zone, which can damage the quality of your social support. What's really interesting is that while cancel culture has risen, Google searches for be authentic have quadrupled because people are so afraid of saying the wrong thing that they are stifling themselves and it's hurting their social relationships. And it also hurts our cognitive process as well as our emotional regulation. So that social support really is important. And our social support can only be as good as we are able to be authentic.
As you mentioned in your new book, Can I Say That? You tackle the fear of saying the wrong thing. What is the hidden psychological cost of chronic self-censorship, and how does a leader break the ice to move a culture toward honest, grounded dialogue without causing a corporate meltdown?
Yeah, thank you. That's such a good question. The cost of self censorship, and I'm so glad you're asking that because a lot of times, myself included, I share my own personal journey in the book too. Can I say that? Why free speech matters and how to use it fearlessly. I was caught up in that too, where I thought, well, it's going to be a risk if I say what I really think about certain topics. And so I'll play it safe and just, keep those views to myself without even realizing that what I was doing, psychologists actually call repression suppression. And eventually people lapse into denial where they kind of lose touch even with their own thoughts. And the cost to even corporations in that, I've been so thrilled that a lot of prestigious academic institutions as well as corporations have invited me to speak about this topic because they're realizing that they used to think the safe thing to do was to just kind of enforce a big politically correct speech code essentially on the whole workplace, and that would just avoid any controversies or problems. But what they're realizing now is that all that does is it pushes people underground. It pushes people's real beliefs underground. It creates a culture of passive aggression where people are, they can't handle their differences directly. So they become kind of stilted and phony and shut down and just less real, less authentic with each other. And that hurts the workplace because then we're not bringing our whole brain to work. I unpack in the book many of the cognitive benefits of freedom of speech is that it actually sharpens our cognitive awareness. It stimulates greater ability to collaborate on problems when we can speak creatively and freely and make jokes and not worry about, saying the wrong thing. And when people hold things in so much because they're terrified of, offending somebody or stepping on somebody's toes, meetings become very constrained and dry and boring. And people get actually less engaged and they're less cognitively facile. They're less cognitively involved in the conversation, and the quality of the types of solutions that they can offer when collaborating on problems actually decreases because they're tamping down parts of their brain. And we can't do that. We cannot do that selectively. If we tamp down our brain, it tends to be global. We can't say, well, I'll be open and creative in this area, but not in that area. So I think companies and corporations are starting to want to find a balance. Again, of course, we want healthy self-restraint. We don't want people to just have no filter in the workplace, but we also don't want people to feel like they're on complete and total eggshells.
Absolutely. That's such valuable insight that when people feel they cannot speak their minds, it breeds a culture of passive aggressiveness. And then, as you say, they don't bring their whole selves to the conversation or to the meeting or to the solution. Whereas if people have the ability to speak out, it actually sharpens them to bring more of themselves to the table. In an era where people are quick to take offense, leaders often confuse empathy with excessive caution. What is the mental filter a leader should use to enter a sensitive conversation so that they can be direct and respectful without walking on eggshells, as you mentioned earlier?
Well, that's a great question. I want to make sure I really get at the heart of what you're asking because that question I think could actually go in a lot of ways. Can you give an example?
Well, I guess when there is a difficult conversation to be had, when maybe a mistake was maybe somebody's not living up to the expectations for their role, it's the easy way to sweep it under the carpet without actually dealing with the problem. How do we deal with that directly without feeling like we're going to offend them to the level they're going to walk out the door?
So I share a story, a vignette in the book, actually. It's an anonymized, client story about a woman that was underperforming in the workplace. And she was blaming her underperformance on so-called bullying that she was experiencing in the workplace. Now, I also unpack in the book that there's something called secondary gains of victimhood. It's a classic example from Psychology 101 textbooks is that there'll be a little girl with a broken leg. And then because her leg is broken, she has a cast. Everybody signs her cast. She gets special attention. She gets to skip gym class. And then when the leg is actually healed, the doctor to take off the cast and she says, no, no, no. And she insists it's still broken because she's become so attached to the gains of this injury. People can do that consciously or even unconsciously. In the story in the book, one of the things that was going on with this woman who was underperforming and blaming it on bullying bullying is that the so-called, and I say so-called for reasons I'll explore in a moment, the so-called bullying was becoming a pass to avoid taking responsibility for her underperformance at work. What we ended up doing is the company had me work with this woman, and originally it was to help her to be more assertive about with the so-called bully. But as we explored it, what we discovered was that she was actually needling this person herself. She was declining opportunities to just avoid contact with the person, that she had become attached to it. And so when we really dug into it, she was able to acknowledge that there were some skills gaps that she had. And then she was able, once she could acknowledge that directly, she was able to just, take a course or two or get some support in that and fix the underperformance problem directly and stop blaming it on a fake problem of being bullied when that wasn't even really happening. So, to your point, when we need to have that sensitive conversation in the example you gave of somebody who's not performing, I think probably most of your listeners have heard the standard advice, which is true, which is that you should absolutely talk about the person's strengths, acknowledge that their underperformance is unusual for them. And so that's why you want to see what you can do to help and support them. And if they're willing and able to accept that support directly, well, great, then you probably won't have any problems. But if they want to deflect and try to blame it on other things, like, oh, well, I wasn't given opportunities for training or whatever, when they absolutely were given every opportunity for training and they never once even asked a question during the training, for example. When you feel like in those conversations, the person's trying to deflect and you want to try to be assertive and direct and use your freedom of expression, but as you said, in a way that doesn't alienate the person, Hilmarie, I think that it's important to do reflective listening as well, first of all, which is just to say, okay, so I hear you saying that you don't feel like you've been given the proper training and that's the reason for the underperformance here. Is that right? Just to make sure that you're showing them that respect by recapping what they've said so that they know that you're hearing them. Because when our heart rate goes above 100 beats per minute, we actually are not even cognitively processing things as well. So you're showing the person that you're calm enough to hear them and to restate what they have said. What you're also doing is you're letting them know that they're going to be held accountable for what they said, that you're really recording it and registering it. Then if they say, yeah, that's right, you can say, well, that's interesting. I do have your training records here. It actually says that you indicated that you felt you were done with training and that you didn't have any questions. So I'm wondering if maybe you'd like to revise your position on that. Would you like to go take the training again? Are there any questions that you'd like to voice now that you've had some more experience, et cetera? So I do think it's really important, Hilmarie, to remain accountable with people, but also, of course, to remain compassionate and try to give them a chance to step up. And if they just won't step up at a certain point, obviously it's just not a fit. But I find many people will perform at the level at which they are managed. So if you or your managers kind of allow the person to deflect and dance their way out of real talk, they will. The sweet spot comes in when we can be direct and accountable, but also compassionate.
I also like how you said you need to notice actions and response versus just the words that they're using to hold them accountable. So in that case, you also need a process where you are documenting conversations, experiences, training that you can refer to then hold them accountable to the things that they are saying.
Exactly. And the more documentation, the better. And the beauty of it is that in these days with email, if the person is, for example, not answering emails or not following directions that were given in emails or whatever, it's usually pretty easy to have a paper trail so that you can offer the person. I always think it's good if you're going to have a performance talk with somebody, you should have at least, say, 4 good examples, because maybe the first 1 or 2, they'll try to explain away. But once you have 3 or 4 good examples, it becomes pretty easy to tell if this person is going to take ownership or if they're going to continue to deflect even in the face of ample evidence.
Really excellent tips there. I don't think it's something I've thought about a lot, but I think having that paper trail, as you say, is something really, really practical. Now, I want to make it a little bit practical. When an intelligent professional feels a wave of panic, right before a major pitch. You also mentioned about when we're stressed, above 100 beats a minute, we don't think in the same way. What is a practical, immediate tool they can use to channel that energy into sharp focus? And while we're on the talk of tools and how everyone can use them, can you also look at or talk a little bit about how women are different to men in navigating pressure?
We would want to think of the context. So if as you said, an individual that feels a wave of panic before a presentation, if somebody came to me with that, one of the first things I would ask is this a pattern? Do you always feel a wave of panic before a presentation? Or is this something new? Because sometimes panic before a presentation can mean that you haven't prepared. So first we want to study the source. If sometimes, again, the healthy function of anxiety can be to stimulate preparation behaviors. So I might ask the person, is that panic trying to cue you to realize that you'd be doing yourself a favor, do a little bit more prep, or, do you need some support, or do you need to do a mock presentation first? What supportive action could that pattern of panic before presentations be cueing for you? But if the person says, no, I really do, prepare as much as one could, and I just still always get this wave of panic beforehand, then I would approve of the idea of using some calming techniques or some focusing techniques. But I would first want to rule out that it wasn't actually a legitimate signal for a need of additional preparation. But if it's truly just nerves, then a couple of thoughts. One is I might suggest to the person that they make an acronym of things that they want to say and do in a certain order. So, maybe they want to make sure that they greet their audience, make eye contact. There's 3 main points that they want to make, and then there's 2 things that they want to do when they close. So that's 7 items that I just mentioned there. I would say, since you know that you get these little panic attacks before you go, I want you to make an acronym that represents each one of those 7 things. And then when you feel that wave of panic, I want you to mentally cycle through your acronym. So it's something really simple that you can stay focused on. Another just super simple thing to do is to, obviously, I'm sure everybody's heard of taking deep breaths before. And then as you exhale, slowly, silently, saying to yourself, my head is above my shoulders are above my waist is above my feet. And just simply repeating that to yourself. Because what happens in panic, true panic, is that oftentimes we lose our full capacity for language. Again, we're talking about true panic here, panic attacks. And then it becomes a vicious circle because when you can't think clearly with language, again, that's going back to the current book that I have is really language hinges. Many of our cognitive and social capacities really hinge on language. And so when we feel our language skills getting wobbly in the case of panic, it can cycle us even deeper into panic. So that simple statement about, your head and your shoulders and your waist and your feet sounds so simple that it would be boring when you're not in panic. But when you are in panic, if you've practiced that to the point where you could recite it like the alphabet, it will help to calm you and reactivate your language abilities. Same thing with that acronym for what you want to do during the presentation. If you've practiced that acronym enough in preparation for the panic that you tend to experience, then you've prepared yourself and given yourself a simple language-based tool that will keep you focused and reactivate those language skills when you're getting ready to speak.
So interesting. And I love how you said you need to understand, is this a pattern? Is it a one-off thing? Is your body telling you that you need better preparation? Can you do things before the presentation that will take out that panic versus, yes, I've done the preparation, I've done everything possible, but I still have the nerves at the moment where I need to make the presentation. And then there's different steps that you can take at that point, simple tools that you can then use to help calm your nerves at that time. And as you say, again, prepare for that ahead of time so that you can use those tools at that time.
Exactly. It's annoying when we have issues of anxiety that crop up repeatedly. Like, it's annoying and it's worse because it feels like it happens all the time. But the silver lining is that what we can predict, we can prepare for. So the beauty of it is that if it does tend to happen repeatedly, at least we can make a good plan for it.
Dr. Chloe, let's bridge the gap between high-level vision and grounded execution. We call this the Monday move. As a clinical psychologist, you are constantly absorbing the anxieties of others. Or maybe that's the wrong word to use or the wrong phrase to use. I don't know. You correct me if I'm wrong. But what did you do this past Monday morning at 9 a.m. to protect your own boundaries and ensure you don't burn out or you didn't burn out yourself? I don't want the clinical theory. I want the ground level protocol. What was the specific move you made to start your week with intention?
Sure, thanks. I appreciate your clarification there. As a clinical psychologist, I don't necessarily absorb the anxiety of others, but I do observe the anxiety of others. And with my own stress management, I think when specifically you said Monday morning, what would be happening for me specifically on Monday morning is that I would be specifically waking up from an early night to bed on Sunday. So I always think of Sunday night as my time to just be calm and reset myself for the week to come. So I'm going to have everything thought out a little bit for the week ahead and have gone to bed nice and early so that already when I'm waking up on Monday morning, I'm, waking up in a context of feeling prepared and well rested. And then just another quick tip that I think is nice for people that are busy, that do want to protect their peace is if you can go for a walk and then at the same time have a call list of people that you keep meaning to catch up with, but that you feel like you never do or you never have time. And then when you're out on that walk, cycle through your call list and just try to call somebody. And that way you're doing multiple good things for your stress at once. You're walking, so that's good for you. You're exercising, you're in nature, and you're engaging in social support and keeping your social networks alive. So it's a triple whammy and it's good for you on multiple levels.
Absolutely. That's ticking a lot of the boxes. I like how you said you also set your intention on Sunday evening. You don't wait for Monday morning. By Sunday evening, you know how your week is going to start. And that's also very practical to have that call list. So when you're taking that walk, which is physically good for you, also then do those social connections. Really practical. Thank you for that. Now, you might have touched on this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. We all make thousands of decisions, but very few of those actually shape the course of our lives. So can you tell us about a time that you had to make a difficult decision to speak up or share an unpopular truth, perhaps taking a professional risk to do so? What did it cost you in the short term? What did it gain you in the long run?
Yeah, as I was mentioning, I had a lot of thoughts about potential harms of masking children for long periods of time during COVID. And so I wrote out all of my reasons into an article to make sure I was organized myself and clear headed about this instead of just leaving it as just a feeling in my mind. And then I shared the article with some colleagues before sharing it publicly to ask, am I missing something here? Like, how come nobody else is really talking about this? Because nobody was really at that point. They said, no, Chloe, everything in here is correct, but you should not share it because it could discourage people from masking their children. So it was super confusing to me. What a confusing answer, right? So I decided to go ahead and share the article anyway. It did feel like a big risk to me because I do have a lot of corporate speaking agreements and I, get a fair amount of media attention and things. And I thought, this could be controversial. This could blacklist me in certain ways. But I just decided I felt like I had to do it because when it came to, it felt like protecting children. I felt like, people needed to know this. So I shared it and I started hearing literally from all over the world, from parents all over the world that were like, thank you so much for putting scientific language on something that we just knew in our instincts just didn't feel right. So it prompted those conversations. And then I did start hearing from other media sources that did want to do news segments about this issue and about this concern. And so it did lead to some difficulties. Same thing with my new book, Can I Say That? Why Free Speech Matters and How to Use It Fearlessly. It did cause me to essentially get dropped by a fancy literary agent. And even though my previous book had been published in 5 languages, my big publisher didn't want to do this book. But instead, I found a new agent and a new publisher. And, this book is doing well and it's provoking new conversations. And so it was a risk, but I'm glad I took it.
Well, amazing. Thank you for sharing that experience. And as you say, the reward was there, but certainly a risk at the time, especially when you get those mixed messages from other professionals who say, don't put it out there. You're going to get blacklisted. But you took that risk and the results are positive at the end of the day. Now we've come to the segment of our show where I'll ask you some rapid fire questions, our version of a game show. So I'll ask the question, you give me the first thing that pops into your mind. Are you ready?
All right.
What is the biggest myth people still believe about therapy?
That it always works or that everything their therapist says to them is correct. I'm sure we've all had the experience of somebody saying, well, my therapist said this or that or whatever is as if that, necessarily makes it true or makes it gospel. I think people need to realize, unfortunately, a lot of times many therapists are just validating what you say rather than necessarily challenging you when it might actually be appropriate to do so. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of objective accountability when it comes to therapists. There's, I think, a lot of work to do in that department. So, as a clinical psychologist, of course, I believe in the curative powers of therapy. It's not 100%. And it's important to make sure that you're getting the right therapy for your specific issue and to make sure that you're actually getting better instead of just getting validated.
Very interesting. What is your go-to method for decompressing after a highly intense day?
Well, I love to be with friends and people. I love a good meal with a great glass of wine or whatever the case may be. So I find being with other people and talking things through. Again, that was one of the things I discovered in my book is just, as a psychologist, of course, I knew about the power of talking and social support, but really breaking it down on a scientific level to understanding that our cortisol levels drop and we experience brain changes when we are with people that we're having real talk with. And so after a stressful day, to have people that you can unpack that with and break bread together, there's something very primal about sharing a meal together that connects people. I think that can be one of the best medicines.
Other than your own, what is one book every leader should read?
I would say How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
It's a classic.
Yeah, it's a classic, but frankly, I feel like I need to reread it. I haven't read it in probably 15 years, and I feel like I should probably read it again. It's so simple, but has so much good stuff.
What is one word you wish corporate leaders would use more often?
Real talk. It's 2 words, but I feel like a lot of people are so sick of corporate speak, and employees as well are so sick of, their leaders, telling them like, let's be brave, let's be authentic, etc. But they don't feel like they really mean it. If they want to actually engage in real talk and really invite people to do that, I think that they would be pleasantly surprised at the results.
The most overhyped self-care trend you wish would go away?
Well, I don't know if it's overhyped, but there's a horrible trend called going no contact that I wish would go away, where people are even again sometimes being encouraged by therapists, which again I speaks to the earlier issue about sometimes the quality of therapy, to go no contact with friends and relatives over differences of opinion about social issues. I think people are going no contact too frequently and too easily over issues that they really don't need to. I think it undermines their own psychological resiliency to feel like they can't, remain in contact and in relationship with people that have a diverse viewpoint. And of course, it exacerbates our epidemic of loneliness and it makes it harder for people to express themselves authentically when they're afraid of that. So the whole cancel culture, going no contact, really judgmental side of self-care, I'd like to see that go away.
The best piece of advice you've ever received from a patient?
Wow. It's funny. The best piece of advice that I ever received from a patient, I actually once, when I was first starting my practice, had a patient that was a social media manager, and I wasn't on social media much at all. And she loved my work. She loved everything we did together. She said, I want you to share your message more, and I want more people to hear it. And so she really walked me through how to have a social media presence and how to engage on social media. And that led to a larger media presence. And it led to me being able to be in a position where big publishers would take my books and things. So I would put that right up there with the best advice from a patient.
Absolutely. Great that she was able to and willing to share that piece of advice with you. It makes all the difference to be visible on social media. Now we have one final tradition. We call it the green pill reflection. I'm going to ask you one thing that you might feel a bit unsettling. I'm going to ask for your truth, not the PR answer. You help people use their anxiety as meaningful information. What is one thing your own anxiety has been trying to tell you lately that you've had a hard time listening to?
That's an interesting question. Something that my own anxiety has been trying to tell me that I've had a hard time listening to. I would say that there's probably certain extended family members that I know I haven't been in touch with as much as I should. And I do feel kind of like that little overhang of, gnawing, unchecked box feeling like I should reach out to them, even though, to be honest, sometimes I don't really want to. I do think that maintaining those relationships has value, even if it doesn't feel pleasant or attractive in the moment. And so that would be something I should probably act on.
Well, thank you for your honesty. Incredibly powerful. Dr. Chloe, thank you so much for your warmth, your directness, and for providing us with such a practical framework for our own mental health today.
Thank you, Hilmarie. It was really a pleasure.
Dr. Chloe, can you please tell our audience where they can find out more about your work and follow your insights?
Sure, of course. They can come to my website, which is drchloe.com. If that's too much of a mouthful, I know it, drchloe.com. They can go to freespeechtoday.com, and freespeechtoday.com just points to drchloe.com. So they all go to the same place. And that's where people can find all of my books about free speech or anxiety, or even I have one about dating. And they can also see all of my social media handles and everything else. My books are also all available on audiobook, which is great. So they're on Amazon and everywhere books are sold. But if you have any trouble finding them, always through my website, you can contact or through social media.
Perfect. Thank you very much for this. And we'll also make sure to include this in the show notes. And to our audience, if today's conversation shifted how you think about anxiety, communication, or leadership, please follow the show and leave us a 5-star review. It helps us reach more founders and decision makers who are committed to leading with clarity and emotional intelligence. If you enjoy our conversations, please like and subscribe. See you next Wednesday.